Welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to cover the Cleric's Death Domain class specialization from the Dungeon Master's Guide, providing a brief description of the subclass, as well as explain and set up the various features gained. Clerics of the Death Domain, or more commonly called Evil High Priests or Priestesses, have the largest number of gods they can choose to worship from simply due to the fact that this class specialization covers most, if not all, of the basic evil priesthoods. These kinds of characters are those who deal with causing death, pain, disease, and poison, and are basically the antagonists in all player campaigns that involve these kinds of plots. These priests believe that death is the penultimate goal of life and will work their magic to bring that end to fruition through whatever means they can imagine. They will also have a small cadre of evil creatures and underlings that do much of the work, so they themselves can focus solely on the more critical aspects of their overall plan. Players will not necessarily get to take this kind of character or class unless they are playing a chaotic evil character in a campaign designed for them, because most DMs generally won't allow this kind of character to exist in their overall campaign. However, there are some DMs who will allow this class, and others like it, but don't be surprised if the DM you're trying to get a game going with doesn't allow it, because that's not the type of game that they're looking for. You got to remember, while you're there to have fun and enjoy the overall experience, the DM also has to enjoy that experience, and if they're not comfortable doing versus kinds of campaigns, and they're not enjoying that whole process, they're most likely not going to do it. Now, clerics themselves get to choose their domain at level 1, and this is because their domain grants them the spells that they're going to be able to cast and use. So I'm going to go quickly create a level 1 cleric, and then return just as I'm about to select the class while the character wizard is up and running. So I'm at the point where I'm now creating or selecting the class. And the way that this is going to work is as soon as you click the cleric, you're going to be prompted for your specialization. And in this particular case, I want the death domain. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of this class creation. I'm not even going to populate any inventory except for a handful of items in it, so that we can continue on with the rest of this video. Now, in this particular video, I'm only going to be covering the aspects specific to Death Domain. I've already covered all of the clerical configurations and basic skills in another video, which I will link in the description below. So I highly recommend you watch the Life Domain Cleric video, because that covers everything from levels 1 through to level 20. All clerical domains gain what are called domain spells, and while other subclasses that I have covered so far have broken this out into its own information sheet, the Dungeon Master's Guide appears to not have done that for this particular class. And domain spells are spells that your character will always have access to as long as your character has available spell slots. And they also do not need to be prepared, nor do they count towards your character's limits for spell preparation. At each level indicated that your character takes in the cleric class, they will gain access to new spells. So initially, at level 1, your character will automatically have access to the False Life and Ray of Sickness spells, but once your character begins to add new levels into the clerical class and reaches levels 3, 5, 7, and 9, they will gain access to the spells that are indicated in that list. Now, I like to separate out domain spells from the other spells simply because of their separation requirement from the preparation list. By default, when you drag that into place, it's going to drop it into what would be classified as spells level 1. We don't necessarily want that there. We want this into its own group, so I'm going to call this domain spells. And that's going to create an entirely different group. We also want to make sure that this group type is of spells, and that's because when we run out of spell slots, the spells that are here also have to go away. I'm then going to drag Ray of Sickness into here, and it will automatically append it to this particular group going forward. Now, anytime we drag an additional domain spell onto the character sheet, you're going to want to drop it into one of these groups. Doesn't matter what level it was, but you'll want to drop it into one of these groups. And what that will do is automatically create a new group of the exact same kind and the exact same name, with the exception it will indicate it's now level 2 or level 3 or whatever level the spell happens to be when you drag it into place, and it will pop it below. This way it keeps everything organized so that you have your other spells down here and the domain spells up here. Now, while you don't necessarily have to prepare these spells, I always like to make sure that they're checkmarked to ensure that they exist and are active in a combat situation. Because otherwise, and it doesn't always happen, you could end up with a spell, like you can see here, for example, our level 1 spells, they currently don't exist because we don't have them prepared. You have to go back and select the ones that you want to go through and prepare. And you'll want to follow the spellcasting guide here in order to do that, but that's covered in the base Cleric video. Now, another feature your character is going to gain at level 1 is called the bonus Proficiency feature, and it's simple in that it grants your character proficiency with martial weapons, something not all clerics gain access to. And setup is just as simple. All we have to do, you see here where it says simple weapons? All we need to do is hit enter and add martial weapons. And that gives you the ability to essentially use almost any weapon within the weapons table. The last feature your character gains at level 1 is called Reaper, and it gives your character a new cantrip. This cantrip is going to be in addition to your existing cantrips, but it must be from the Necromancy domain. In all other aspects, it will simply be dragged and dropped into your cantrips list here. To gain access to that, all you have to do is go to Spells and select the actual source to be Cleric. That will narrow down the overall spell list there. You'll want to make sure that you also reduce it to 0 in order to ensure that you are looking at the actual cantrips themselves, because that's what a cantrip is. It's a level 0 spell. Now, I already have Toll the Dead. That's one of the ones that I selected when I created this character. Let's see if there's another necromancy-based cantrip here that I could add as part of this process. So I didn't look ahead when I went through and created this. There we go, Spare the Dying. So I could add Spare the Dying to our cantrips list here, and this will function as it normally does, with one key exception. Whenever your character casts a necromancy-based cantrip, if that cantrip were to usually target only one target, it will now target 2. The only limitation is that both of those characters or creatures that you're going to target and activate that spell on have to be within 5 feet of each other. So essentially standing next to each other. So what does that actually look like inside of a combat tracker situation? Well, let's take, for example, our Cleric domain. I'll give us the action token here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute this Toll the Dead thing. Let's say that apes 2 and 3 are standing next to each other. Well, I'm going to target both of them. I am then going to force the saving throw roll. Now here is the fun part, if you will. So 1 succeeded, which is ape 2, which is a good thing for it. And ape 3 failed. So ape 3 failed, meaning we only have to hit this button to apply the damage. I was kind of hoping that ape 2 would also fail, because then it would have complicated this whole situation. So let's use that as an example. By the definition of Toll the Dead, if a target is already missing some of its hit points, it will take 1d12 necrotic damage, not 1d8. And that increases over time. So if ape 2 had in fact failed, I would have had to have dragged this d12 onto ape 2, which is most likely going to kill it, unless it rolls a 1. Yep, it's now dying. And then dragged over the 1d8 and applied it to ape 3. That is simply to separate the damage type out. Now, if both of them had been damaged, or both of them had been undamaged, simply clicking on either of these 2 dice would have sufficed for applying the damage appropriately. At Cleric level 2, your character will now gain access to the Channel Divinity Touch of Death feature, and this is one that works alongside your character's other Channel Divinity features, as well as shares the number of uses. In this particular case, when your character hits with a melee-based attack, they can add additional damage that will be twice your character's level. So initially at level 2, that would be a total of 4 points, plus a bonus 5 points on top of that. To set this up in your Actions tab is going to be a little bit different. What we want to do is actually grab Channel Divinity first and drop that into our group here, or our Actions tab. We then want to create a Channel Divinity group. And there's a reason we're doing this, and I'm going to call this Turn Undead, although chances are, as a necromancer, you're not going to be turning the undead. The next thing I'm going to do is modify this power group to have one daily use. And that is because Channel Divinity itself requires one use initially, but at level 6, you gain access to being able to use it twice, and at level 18, you gain access to being able to use it 3 times before you need a long rest in order to get this back. And that's the reason why I've set this as a daily rest. In fact, I think it's a long rest. Is it a short rest? Oh, no, it's a short rest. So we can modify this. I apologize. And that could be rest. Now, we're then going to want to drag and drop this particular feature onto our character sheet and move it into the same group. And it doesn't have the actual damage set up here. So when the cleric hits a creature with a melee attack, that cleric can use Channel Divinity to deal extra necrotic damage. So what we then need to do is add a damage effect. And this will work as well as a normal effect, but I think this one's going to be a little bit easier to deal with. So the first things first is we want to have twice our clerical level. So we're looking for the cleric level here, or class, so CLE, plus 5, 5, not 6, and it's going to be necrotic damage. And you can see here that we were doing a total of 9 necrotic damage. And that's because at level 2, it's times 2 that, so that's 4 plus 5 is 9. As our character increases in level, this damage will also increase. Now, making use of this in a combat tracker scenario is relatively easy. Let's say that we want to attack with our Warhammer. I'm going to target Ape 3 again, so I'm going to roll with that Warhammer. It's a melee-based attack. I hit. I can now do the damage, and then I can make use of this damage here, but then I have to tick off that I've used the Channel Divinity feature. You'll notice that these two cases now share that usage. And that's how Channel Divinity works. It's the same aspect of the same feature, if that makes any sense. It's just simply different options. Now, at level 3, we're going to gain access to our next domain spells. And it will also happen at level 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly flop back to here, minimize that group, and I'm going to expand our domain spells group. And I'm going to drag Blindness and Rave Enfeeblement into place here. And what you'll see will happen is we now get a new domain spells group. And that's exactly what we want, because all of the features are going to be shared through this group. That means any customizations we put into place here will be shared between these two groups and any other group that we then link from this. Spells from this group will share spells from other spells in the group, meaning that if we make adjustments to here, it's going to affect anything that has this spells title, not just spells. Level 1. Same thing happens with the main spells. Anytime we make an adjustment here, so let's say if I make the strength there, and then go here, you'll see that strength is now here. And I'm going to put that back to, the normal thing. And that's because these two share the power group properties. Now at level 5, the same thing happens. I'm simply going to drop that into place, and then go ahead and drop these two things into place. And what we will see is we now have a domain spells level 3 with our 2 spells in there. At clerical level 6, your character will now gain access to the Inescapable Destruction feature that gives your character the means to ignore resistance when dealing necrotic damage to a target. The issue with this feature is that there is no indicator within Fantasy Grounds to tell a target to ignore that resistance that it has on it. So you as the player will have to inform the DM that with the passive ability, any creature you hit with necrotic damage will not be able to resist that damage, even if they have natural magical resistances to it. This is, however, restricted to your Channel Divinity feature, as well as any cantrips and spells that you cast. Now, I've temporarily gone ahead and dragged over the Dungeon Master screen to show you what would have to happen. When you inform the Dungeon Master that if they have resistance to necrotic damage, it's going to be ignored for the purposes of the damage that you're about to do. What they will do is they will simply modify this particular resistance here, if you will. You can see that we have necrotic damage, and you can either skip it for the one use, meaning that the amount of damage that you do to that vampire will automatically skip it, allowing all of the damage through, but then it will reactivate for the next attack, making it nice and simple. Or the DM can simply turn it off completely, and all they do is they just click with the left mouse button on this feature here. Now I'm going to set this to skip. I'm going to roll the damage on the player side, and then I'm going to show you what happens automatically when that goes through and gets done. So you will see two things. You will see that I did damage with Toll the Dead. We know that that is necrotic damage. It did a total of 6 points, and it did all 6 points to the vampire. This effect is now no longer in a skipped state. So that means that it applied the damage and then reverted our change to this particular feature. I like that. That's a very nice feature here. So with that, that's how you would make use of the skill. At level 7, we will be gaining our next domain spells. So I'm going to quickly just drag and drop those into place. And it will be Blight and Death Ward that you'll be gaining. And that will give us our level 4 category with Blight and Death Ward in it. At Cleric level 8, your character will now gain access to the Divine Strike feature that gives your character a means to add additional necrotic damage when making use of ranged or melee-based weapons. When your character hits with one of these types of weapons, you can choose to add an additional damage roll for 1d8 of necrotic damage when you first acquire this feature and from that point on. However, you can do this only once per turn, so if you have a means to attack twice, it will only be usable on one of those attacks, but it is usable again on your next turn. Additionally, when your character reaches level 14, the total amount of damage this feature can do increases from 1d8 to 2d8 points of damage. So let's go ahead and quickly set this up. This is going to be part of our new group that we haven't yet created for our cleric because, to be honest, this is the first feature that would actually fall under this category. So I'm going to drag that to a safe area, and it's going to go into a powers group here. I'm going to call this Death Domain. And that's going to drop it somewhere within our Actions tab. We already have the necrotic damage set up, so there's nothing that we have to do there. And when we actually do damage to a particular creature, so let's say I've attacked with this Warhammer, I'm not sure why I have double. Oh, because the ape is unconscious. That would be why. Then what I would do is I would apply this effect before I applied and rolled the damage. And you'll see that the effect goes away, and you get 2d8 of die rolled. One for the Warhammer, one for the actual Divine Strike. Now, I would otherwise not be able to make use of this feature again until the next turn. And I could do it on whenever I attack another creature, or if I'm still attacking the same creature, I can continue to use this feature on that creature. At level 9, we will be gaining our last set of domain spells. So I'm going to go ahead and temporarily expand out level 1 here and drop our 2 spells here. And what we should see is our level 5 category now gets created. And it will contain both of our spells. We have now completed everything that we have to do when it comes to our domain spells. We don't get any additional spells. Now, at level 14, we have to adjust our Death Domain's Divine Strike feature. And we're going to be increasing this from 1d8 of necrotic damage to 2d8 of necrotic damage. And wow, tongue twister there. But anyway, now when we go ahead and make use of this attack, so I'm going to change targets. I'm not going to target myself. I'm going to untarget this and target the vampire because I want to show the resistance coming through. I'm going to make our attack roll. That's going to be a flat out miss. I'm going to make our attack roll again. That is still going to be a miss. I'm going to make it a third time and get a 20. Nice. Now, before I roll this 1d8 of bludgeoning damage, I'm going to want to ensure I click this effect here. I'm then going to roll, and we should see a massive number of dice here that get rolled. That's because even when you include this effect as part of your damage roll, it too gets to take advantage of the critical damage. So, I'm actually happy that I rolled a 20 there. Now, there's also some partial resistance here. That's because a good chunk of the overall damage here was necrotic damage, and the other chunk of it was bludgeoning damage, which means that that vampire resisted practically everything that we gave it. It reduces it to roughly half, is essentially what you get as an end result. At clerical level 17, your character will gain access to their final domain feature called Improved Reaper, which enhances your Reaper feature by extending its benefits up to level 5 spells, not just your cantrips. The same rules apply in that if the spell would normally only target one creature, it can now target up to 2, as long as they are both within the range of the spell and are within 5 feet of each other. But if this is a spell that takes components that can't simply be replaced by your character's spell focus, then the materials and the cost for them for both of those creatures will have to be supplied as if you were going to cast the spell simply twice in a row. But in this particular case, you're doing it for 2 different targets. So if you have the requirement for a 1,000 gold piece diamond in order to cast a spell, you now have to have 2 of those diamonds to do this. But just like our Reaper feature, we don't necessarily need to add this to our Actions tab. All we have to do is declare to the Dungeon Master, hey, I'm casting a Necromancer-based spell. I get to target 2 creatures, not just 1. And that completes everything that we have to deal with when it comes to the Death Domain. And I must admit, I've never really liked evil classes. Excuse me. And this is the perfect example of one that would really throw a lot of wrenches into an active campaign, potentially making whatever campaign you're going to have on the go a single-person show. This class is built very much in a way that it's designed to grief other players just as much as it can be used to deal with mobs, and the spells gained just compound that issue. And to quote something that was said in the mid to late 80s, I pity the fool DM who would allow this kind of class into their campaign if they're not doing an evil player-based campaign, because it's going to cause them problems. I would only recommend players look at this particular class if and only if the DM is setting up a campaign specifically designed for evil characters or is creating a player versus player campaign between 2 different player groups. However, this does bring us to the end of this video, and I hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comment section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.